When most people think about rhabdomyolysis, they assume that you can only get it from strength training. Well, what about aerobic type activities? Can you get rhabdo from doing cardio, like, say, spinning classes? Yeah. In this week's episode, I'm going to show you the reports that have occurred over the last several years on people getting rhabdomyolysis from indoor cycling classes. You may be surprised at what I'm about to say. I want to welcome you to another episode of my podcast. I'm exercise physiologist Joe Cannon, back for another week where we talk about all things health, wellness, dietary supplements related, and rhabdomyolysis too. If you've listened to me before, you know this is one of my pet topics that I like to talk about. I've been investigating rhabdo for over a decade, probably the only guy in the world who talks at length about rhabdo, wrote the first book about this, and lectures extensively on this topic. Rhabdomyolysis is something I don't think a lot of people are still aware of. I do think things are getting better, but I think there is more room still for better education. And that's why I like talking about it like I do. Now, if you are discovering my podcast for the very first time and you just said, what the heck is he talking about? What is rhabdo? Just real quickly, I've talked about it at length before in other episodes, but rhabdomyolysis, abbreviated Rhabdo, R-H-A-B-D-O. It's simply it's a medical disorder. It's a very serious medical disorder. The word literally translates. The word literally means muscle fiber destruction. Basically, your muscle fibers break down, and when they break down, the stuff inside the muscle fibers, the muscle cells, gets into the bloodstream, and this can cause some very, very bad things to occur. And while a lot of things can cause rhabdo, I tend to focus mostly on exercise-induced rhabdomyolysis, sometimes called exertional rhabdo. Essentially, you exercise so much, your muscle fibers break down. As I said, I've been talking about this for a long time, 10, 12 years. Fortunately, since when I first started talking about this phenomenon, a lot of other people have come out and are talking about it as well. I don't think they get all their facts straight, but that's a story for another day. But I'm glad to hear that people are discussing it. But I also think that more education needs to be known about this phenomenon. So what I want to do here is talk about an aspect of rhabdo that I haven't yet previously talked about, and that is the possibility of getting this disorder from indoor cycling classes, what most people call spinning classes. And before I go any further, I'm going to probably use the word spinning and indoor cycling interchangeably, because spinning, we've all heard of that. That's kind of entered our vernacular, kind of like Kleenex and Xerox have. We all think of spinning when we think about indoor cycling. And so I say that because I'm not trying to throw spinning under the bus when I talk about this phenomenon. I do want you to realize that indoor cycling is what I'm really referring to. And that could be indoor cycling in your home, because there's a lot of these advertisements for these products that you can buy, these bikes you can buy and put them in your house. And there's also boutique gyms out there that do nothing but indoor cycling classes, okay? And cycling continues to be very popular in your neighborhood gym as well. So again, I'm going to use these words interchangeably as I speak. I just want you to realize I'm speaking more broadly when I say spinning class or indoor cycling class. Anytime you're in a group setting or cycling alone on your own, that's really what I'm referring to here. To give you a little bit of background, in case, again, you're not familiar with what rhabdo is, serious medical disorder, just to give you a little taste of how serious it possibly can be. Again, when you get this phenomenon, you might experience some really bad side effects. For instance, if you've heard about it before, you've probably heard about, muscle weakness, fatigue, muscle pain. The muscle pain can be very, very intense. As a matter of fact, I would refer you back to a previous interview I did last year with Alexandra Fesco, who described it in the way that I now describe it to people. When she got rhabdomyolysis, she described it as her muscles feeling like they went through a meat grinder and her bones were breaking. That's literally how I now describe it to people, because that's the best description that I've ever heard from anybody else. So in really intense muscle pain, fatigue. Sometimes your urine may change color and look like iced tea or Coca-Cola. As we'll point out today, that doesn't necessarily also have to happen. You may not urinate enough or at all from getting rhabdo. It's another thing to think about. Maybe as your kidneys shut down, you're not urinating as much. Again, kidney failure, something else could happen. Little known that most people are not aware of, liver problems as well. Your liver enzymes go up. Maybe your liver shuts down from rhabdo. And even the worst case of side effect of all from this could be heart attack. Yeah, there are reports of people literally having heart attacks and, unfortunately dying from rhabdomyolysis, which again is one of the reasons why I get so passionate when I talk about this. I do believe that a lot of people don't take rhabdo seriously, whether they're in the general public or whether they're even in the fitness world as an instructor. What I'll do here is I'm going to summarize some of the research on people getting rhabdomyolysis from taking indoor cycling classes. And I want to, at the end of that, I want to kind of bring it back full circle and give you the common denominator. There is a common denominator to all these cases that I'm about to tell you, and that is going to help you to avoid getting rhabdo if you're going to take one of these classes your own. And then after that, I'm going to give you some tips on how to further reduce getting rhabdomyolysis as well if you're taking a group exercise indoor cycling class. So without further ado, let me just jump into some of the reports that have popped up on my computer screen over the years. And I'm going to start with the very first report of anybody ever getting, at least documented, getting rhabdomyolysis from indoor cycling class. It actually dates back to 2004, and this actually occurred in Scotland, where my ancestors hail from. And this occurred in a 34-year-old woman. She had developed leg swelling and intense leg pain after taking a spinning class. One thing that I noted that when I looked at this report was that this woman had said that she had worked out regularly 2 to 3 times a week on a regular basis, but yet she had taken her very first spinning class. Interesting. As I point out to you that this is the very first documented case of rhabdo in a spinning class situation, I don't want you to think that rhabdo is a fairly recent development. There have been reports of rhabdo occurring, again, from a number of reasons, but there's even reports dating back from World War II. Yeah, World War II, because there's been a lot of trauma, Nazis dropping bombs on London, and there have been reports of people experiencing a lot of swelling in their bodies from the trauma of these explosions and stuff like that. So rhabdo can occur from many, many conditions. And just to give you even further, go back further in time that you may not be aware of, there is even a report, I don't even want to call it a report, but in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, there is a passage where the Israelites were eating a lot of quail, and they developed symptoms such that some historians believe was rhabdomyolysis. Yeah, it does appear that rhabdo is even referred to in the Bible. So if you want to grab your Bible, crack it open, go to the book of Exodus, you'll see about this plague that occurred when the Israelites were eating a lot of quail, and a lot of people died from it. And so this does appear to be a phenomenon that's been with us for a very long time. And in terms of the exercise, again, it's hard to pinpoint when this first occurred in people, at least documented, but it has been documented for a number of years. But the very first case of at least a spinning class causing it goes back to 2004. Doctors in, say, the year 2010 reported a very interesting case of a 63-year-old woman who developed rhabdo one day after riding her stationary bike at home. This woman was described as being a recreational athlete. I'm doing air quotes here, but it didn't give any description of what her previous physical activities were like. Is this the very first time she rode her stationary bike? We just don't know. I think this is interesting because of all the advertisements we've been seeing on the internet and television about indoor cycling from home. These bikes are now available to everybody. They'll ship them to you, and you can sign up for a subscription, and you can pedal along with your favorite, cycling instructor on the screen on these TVs. What's the risk of rhabdo from, some of these things? Don't know. Haven't seen any statistics on that as of yet. Again, a rule I like to point out is that rhabdo is most likely a low incidence phenomenon in most people, but when you get it, it actually can be very significant. But I am going to talk about some ways to minimize the risk of rhabdo at the end of this episode, and so that's going to be relevant to whether you're taking a class on your own or whether you've bought one of these bikes for your house and you're doing this on your own. In another report, doctors this actually occurred in Israel. Again, rhabdo, worldwide phenomenon. It's not just centralized to America. I've talked to people all over the world who've gotten rhabdo, but this one actually comes from Israel. 21-year-old woman, she gets rhabdo after doing a spinning class for 45 minutes. She does report this was the very first time she had ever taken a spinning class before. And what makes this interesting is that this woman reports that she's healthy, and she had recently completed taking mandatory military service. So she was fit. She was a fit person, which again busts the myth that it's only beginners and less fit people who get rhabdo. Rhabdo doesn't discriminate. It takes athletes, non-athletes, men, women, children. Again, it is another reason why I like talking about this so much, because potentially anybody has the risk of getting this disorder. She does talk in this report about getting the dark colored urine symptom. Basically, she spent about 5 days in the hospital. Her creatine kinase level was about 132,000. I'm going to bring that up because I'll mention that again. Creatine kinase, abbreviated usually as CK, creatine kinase, that's an enzyme. And the enzyme goes up. It increases with muscle damage. Normal creatine kinase level, just for comparison, is usually anywhere from a little less than 100 to maybe 200 to 300. So she's clocking in at 132,000. And for the personal trainers who are listening to me right now, and I know there's a lot of people in the fitness industry who do listen to me, if you ever do encounter somebody who has had rhabdo, that's probably the first thing they're going to tell you is what their creatine kinase level is. And I think they all do that because when they're in the hospital with rhabdo, that's pretty much probably the only thing they hear the doctors and nurses talking about. Oh, your creatine kinase level was, X, and now it's Y, and now it's Z. It keeps going up. And, that's the only thing they keep hearing about. And so when I encounter individuals who get rhabdo, that's the first thing they tell me about. And so I think if you are in the fitness industry, that's the first thing that they'll probably tell you. And so just realize, again, there's not a lot you can do with that number. I mean, it's a high number, but realize that the number of creatine kinase level is normally pretty low in people, 100, 200, 300 in most individuals. But, it's unusual to be 132,000. That's a very high amount. Not the highest that I have ever heard of before, but it is a very high amount. In another report, 38-year-old guy, he takes his very first indoor cycling class. He says he feels fine during the class, felt a little bit of fatigued afterwards, but the very next day he goes out and does 18 holes of golf. It's hot. It's humid. He's not drinking a lot of liquids when he's golfing. Oh, and then to make matters worse, he also talks about how he had a few beers afterwards. So I bring this up because it's hard to pinpoint in this report if it was the indoor cycling class that caused him to get rhabdo, or was it a combination of maybe the cumulative effect of the class itself, plus the golf, plus the hot and humid environment, plus the fact he's not drinking enough liquids. Oh, and then the liquids he is drinking, beer, probably not the greatest thing to be drinking on a hot day. So we can't really pinpoint the exact cause of his rhabdo, but I thought it was worthy to bring your attention because I have encountered people over the years who have been in a similar situation. They did an exercise class, whether it be indoor cycling or something else, and then the next day they went out and they gardened for 3 hours, or they, say, ran a half marathon or something like that. So it could actually be a cumulative effect in some cases where you just don't know the exact cause. It could be many things contributing to it, and I think that may be what's going on with this guy. Regardless, like a lot of people who get this disorder from indoor cycling classes, he's in the hospital for 4 days. He spends 4 days in the hospital before he actually gets discharged. We got another report of a 26-year-old woman. Again, she's doing her very first indoor spinning class. About 30 minutes into the class, she's experienced some discomfort as she's riding the bike. And then about 2 days later, she can't take the pain anymore because the pain is gradually getting worse and worse and worse. And she notices that her urine has changed color dramatically. She finally goes to the hospital where her CK level or creatine kinase level is at 86,000. She spends 4 days in the hospital, just like the last guy. That's something else too that I wanted to bring up about this, whether doing an indoor cycling class or not. This pain that people experience from rhabdo, it gradually gets worse hour after hour after hour. And again, it's strange because it's a little different than regular delayed muscle soreness. Sometimes delayed muscle soreness that we've all experienced usually pops up 1 or 2 days later. I've heard from people over the years who told me the pain can start almost immediately after they stop exercising, and it may start kind of mild, but over the course of the hours as they tick by, the pain gets worse and worse and worse. I've actually gotten emails from people. I feel so badly for these individuals. It's 2 o'clock in the morning and they can't take the pain no more. They jump on the internet and they do some searching and they find me. And because I talk a lot about rhabdo and I write a lot about rhabdomyolysis, and they email me, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Everybody's asleep. I don't know what to do. Should I call an ambulance? It's 2 o'clock in the morning, so I'm usually glued to my computer, but not so much at 2 a.m. And so I check my email in the morning around 8 or, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whatever. And then I see this, I'm like, uh-oh. And, then I usually write back, are you okay? And hopefully you made the right decision to get checked out by a doctor. But I feel badly for these individuals because, again, they don't know what it is. And the pain sometimes begins fairly gradually, but soon after exercise, and it continues to get worse as the hours tick by. And usually, 10 hours later, again, it's the middle of the night, they're in agonizing pain. And that's when they finally decide they can't take it no more. They gotta go to the hospital or just jump on the internet and try to find some answers to their problems. Again, very, very scary. Another reason why I like talking about this as much as I do. So related to what I just told you, we've got this other report. Dates back to 2014. She's a 26-year-old woman. Again, she's doing her very first indoor cycling class. It's a 30-minute class. This one actually included a 10-minute warm-up period. Her thigh pain persisted for 5 days before she decided to go to the hospital. I cannot imagine the agony this poor woman must have been in for 5 days before she decides to go to the hospital. They admit her, as I would expect that they would, and she spends 3 days in the hospital before she's actually discharged. So a little side note to her report, like the report I mentioned from Israel, this woman also reports being physically active. She had reported that she had worked out on a regular basis 3 times a week for the previous 5 months without any problems whatsoever. This woman was a regular participant in physical activity. She's fit. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to bring this one to your attention is she does report having a low fluid intake on the day of the class. And so you might say, well, she got rhabdo because she was dehydrated. What I want you to realize about this is that dehydration and rhabdo, on the internet, they kind of go hand in hand. A lot of people talk about, oh, you got to drink a lot of water and that's going to protect you against rhabdomyolysis. Myth. I've talked about this in the past. If you go back in the archives of my podcast, I have one on the biggest myths of rhabdomyolysis. This is one of them. I want you to realize drinking water will not prevent rhabdo from occurring. Drinking water will not prevent muscle fiber destruction. Being dehydrated could make the condition worse, but you can be adequately hydrated and still get rhabdomyolysis. That is a message that I think a lot of people need to hear, because for the last several years, there have been people out there and they've been beating this drum, rhabdo dehydration drum, a lot, and they are incorrect. Water doesn't stop muscle fiber death. I need to put that on a t-shirt. But it could make rhabdo worse if you were dehydrated. So we don't know her level of dehydration. She just reports having a low fluid intake. What ultimately does that mean? We don't know. But again, as I'll point out in my tips, that may be one way in which you could mitigate some of the severity of rhabdo. So related to that report, we've got another one. She's 24 and she winds up in the hospital 4 days after her taking her very first spinning class. Again, she suffered through it for 4 days before she decides to go and get checked out by a physician. One thing that's interesting about this, and it kind of goes back to what I said a few minutes ago, this woman reports experiencing soreness in her thighs immediately after the class. And the pain of rhabdo got progressively worse. So there you have further confirmation. Sometimes the pain can happen very quickly after you stop exercising, and hour by hour the pain gets worse. Oh, and in that woman, her creatine kinase level was 161,000. And as a side note to this case, unfortunately, this woman actually required surgery. She required surgery on her thighs because the pressure was building up so much in her thighs. The doctors couldn't bring it down the other way. This increase in swelling and pressure is technically called compartment syndrome. And it can be very, very serious. And sometimes, like this case, you may need surgery to relieve that pressure and get better. In one report from South Korea, this actually occurred between 2014 and 2015, Korean doctors identified 11 cases of rhabdo directly related to indoor cycling classes. All of these cases occurred in young women with no risk factors for disorder. They didn't have any genetic markers. I've talked about the genetics of rhabdo in previous episodes. They had none of those risk factors. And most of these women actually also reported having the infamous dark-colored urine symptom. But like I've said before with hydration, you don't have to have that symptom. That's another myth of rhabdo I like to dispel when I can. You can have rhabdo and your urine doesn't have to look like iced tea or Coca-Cola. That's another myth that I see people propagating on the internet. Again, it's just wrong. You can have normal looking colored urine and you can, I feel funny talking about urine, but your urine can look fairly normal and you can still have this disorder. But all of these women had that classic symptom, and average length of stay for these 11 cases, average length of stay was 7 days in the hospital. These women spent an average of 7 days in the hospital. Very, very sad, especially these days during the pandemic. You don't want to be in the hospital right now during the pandemic. That's the last place I'm sure a lot of people want to be at any time, but especially right now when COVID's going on. That same year in 2015, there was a pretty highly publicized case of a graduate student at the University of Tennessee. She gets rhabdomyolysis 48 hours after taking her very first spinning class. This one actually made headlines. If you keep tabs of this stuff like I do, I saw this on a lot of news outlets, probably because it was quite a serious case. After the class, she reports not being able to move her legs at all. Her legs stopped working. They stopped functioning. Not only that, her liver and kidneys both started to shut down. Yeah, her liver. Remember, rhabdo is not just a kidney-centric disorder. A lot of people out there who like to talk about rhabdo, they like to put all the emphasis on the kidneys. No, it's not. Rhabdo can affect multiple systems. And so in this case, not only was her kidney shutting down, but her liver was shutting down as well. Fortunately, she got medical attention, fully recovered, and that's a very, very good thing. A year later in 2016, we got a 19-year-old woman. Again, she's very fit. She works out regularly. She's taking her very first spinning class. It's a 45-minute long class. She gets swelling in both of her legs. Her urine turns brown, looking like Coca-Cola or iced tea. She's in a hospital. Again, she also required surgery on her legs to relieve the pressure. So we have another report of someone who's fit. She's not used to doing a spinning class, but she's working out regularly. And unfortunately, she also required some surgery. Again, after that, she's discharged. She makes a full recovery, thank goodness. That same year in 2016, researchers in South Korea report a case of rhabdo in what they call a healthy but unfit 21-year-old college student 2 days before seeking medical treatment. So this person actually waited for 2 days before she decides to go to the hospital. She takes part in a 40-minute, and they actually said it was a supervised indoor cycling class. She spent 10 days in a hospital, unfortunately, but she's discharged, and hopefully she's 100% back to normal now. But I thought it was interesting that she said she was in a supervised indoor cycling class. As I'll talk about in a little while, supervised or not, most fitness instructors don't know about rhabdo. So you can be supervised, but if they don't know about the condition, it may not make a difference. And then we've got another case. This one's actually kind of a strange case, in my opinion. She's a 33-year-old woman. She gets rhabdomyolysis after she takes a spinning class that lasted only 15 minutes. Yeah, 15 minutes. That's unusual. She reports she had weakness and pain in both her thighs. She even reports that she's feeling lightheaded. She's throwing up immediately after the class. Her creatine kinase level at the hospital is 60,000. I call this weird and strange because most indoor cycling classes last 30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe 60 minutes. I have not seen any indoor cycling classes lasting only 15 minutes. Wasn't able to find out why it was a 15-minute class. But regardless, my guess is she's unfit. She's really unfit. 15 minutes of cycling and she's throwing up. That tells me she's probably not used to doing that type of class. It doesn't say whether this is her very first class or not, but 15 minutes of cycling, maybe there's a warm-up, maybe there's not a warm-up. It's hard to say here. It goes to show you that you don't have to go out and get on a bike for 3 hours to get this. And this woman, again, 33, she's young. So, but even in a young, apparently healthy, apparently fit person, in some cases, 15 minutes might put you over the edge. I do think that is a rarity, but I think it's worthy to bring this up for those who think that you have to work out very intense for a long time before getting this. And then in another report, we've got yet another 33-year-old woman. She's in the hospital. She's got rhabdo after doing an indoor cycling class. She's got the thigh pain. She's vomiting. She's nauseous. She's not urinating very much, which is most likely a sign that her kidneys are not functioning very well. Her creatine kinase is over 80,000. This woman needed dialysis. Again, her kidneys were shutting down. Remember, she's not urinating. If she's not urinating, that's a sign her kidneys are not working very well. And she had to go on dialysis to help her kidneys recover. When I looked into this report, they did mention this woman had a history of using what they call non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications, NSAIDs, N-S-A-I-D. That's the medical term for over-the-counter pain-relieving medications like aspirin and ibuprofen and stuff like that. We've all taken these things, but the thing that I wondered about when I read this report is something about these NSAIDs that a lot of people are not aware of is these medications can also reduce kidney function. They can also shut down your kidneys if you take too much of them. So when I read this, I wondered, could her rhabdo, especially her kidney dysfunction, be the combination of rhabdo plus her use of NSAIDs? And I wanted to bring this to your attention because nobody wants to be in pain. Nobody wants to be in pain. And when you are in pain, a lot of people are inclined to reach for these medications. Again, you probably have them in your house right now. They're very easily obtained in most countries. In the person who's not aware of what rhabdo is, which is most people out there, and they don't want to be in pain, as we've already discussed, the pain of rhabdomyolysis can feel like your muscles being put through a meat grinder. It's horrific pain. Give you a better idea of how bad that pain is. I've actually heard from people over the years who told me they wanted to have their legs amputated because the pain was so bad. Think about that. You're in such agony that you want the doctors to amputate your legs. That's just unfathomable amount of pain. And so when it gets that bad, or even close to anywhere close, something like that, people reach for some of these medications, and maybe they take too much of it, and maybe the combination of rhabdo affecting the kidneys plus these over-the-counter medications like aspirin and Advil, ibuprofen, whatever, also bringing down the kidney function. Maybe that could make kidney dysfunction even worse. I did speak to a nurse several years ago who did tell me of several cases of people who needed kidney transplants, and this was most likely the reason why. They had developed rhabdo. They didn't know what it was. They thought it was regular muscle soreness. They're taking a lot of these over-the-counter medicines, and the result was they, unfortunately, destroyed their kidneys from too much of these meds combined with rhabdo, and they had to go on, had to get a waiting list for a new kidney. So very, very, very sad. Again, I wanted to bring this to your attention because it is such a sad case, but it also gave me the opportunity to talk about these medications that are very easily obtained. Okay, again, you may have them in your home right now, and anybody might by accident start taking these if they had rhabdo. So it gets to my main thesis that I like to talk about when I discuss rhabdo is someone who thinks they have rhabdo. I think the best course of action is to get checked out by a doctor, go to a hospital, go to one of these urgent care places, get some qualified medical attention who can best help you and figure out what's going on. There's another report that came out a few years ago. She's a 35-year-old woman. She gets rhabdo after taking a low-intensity spinning class. Actually highlighted low intensity in the report. I'm going to give you an idea today how to figure out what's low intensity. I have an easy way to figure this out, but they didn't define what low intensity actually meant. But what I noticed when I read this report is this woman reports falling off the bicycle, the spinning bike, the indoor cycling bike, due to a handlebar malfunction. The handlebars weren't working properly. She falls off the bike. She falls on the floor. She hurts herself. They don't think the fall contributed to the rhabdo. Falls can actually, traumatic injury like a fall could cause rhabdo. They actually ruled this out in the report, if I remember correctly. But she gets back on the bike. She rides for the entire 45-minute class. And then afterwards, because she's in pain, whether it's rhabdo or maybe even the fall, being in pain from the fall, she does also report taking these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications. Don't say what it was, aspirin, ibuprofen, whatever. But it's possible, again, in this case, could it be the combination of, say, the medications plus the exercise class? It's hard to say. But she reports, again, not having any leg swelling and not having any dark colored urine. Urine didn't change color. She's got no leg swelling. Again, that also busts the myth that you got to have these symptoms. Yet, even in the absence of these phenomenons, her creatine kinase level, that enzyme that goes up with muscle damage, that enzyme creatine kinase was 72,000. So extremely high, and she wound up staying in a hospital for a week. Now, I wanted to bring this to your attention because she falls off the bike, and again, that's very, very sad. There appear to be some kind of an issue with the bike. Again, stuff happens, unfortunately, and it's a very, very sad thing that happened. But in some of these classes, I just want you to think about if you're going to be doing these classes. Some of these classes, you always want to make sure the bike is properly adjusted for you, and also in some classes, they actually turn down the lights. It's in the dark when you do these classes. And you wonder why that is, but I think that doing a class in the dark with music blasting, I think is not the greatest environment, if you ask me, because if the lights are turned off and it's dark, the instructor can't see you. If the lights are turned off, it's dark, you can't see the bike, okay? And the music blasting, that adds another thing into the soup here, because I personally don't like a lot of blasting music in classes, because I do think it contributes to hearing loss. Again, not only for the people in the class, but I also think for the group exercise instructors, I do think hearing loss is an issue for them as well that a lot of people are not talking about. That is an issue for another day. I'll stick a fork in that for right now. It's a very sad thing, but she brings up in this report that didn't have some of these classic symptoms, and yet she still had very, very high creatine kinase level. So Rhabdo is perplexing. As I sometimes say, it's a fascinating and perplexing phenomenon because even after a decade or so of investigating it, I still come across things that, kind of raise an eyebrow for me. I'm like, well, that's interesting. Why haven't I ever seen this before? So it can present with it differently in different people, which again gets to my original thesis. The only way to know for sure is to get checked out by a qualified medical professional like a physician. What do all these cases have in common? I just recounted a whole bunch of Rhabdo cases from people doing indoor cycling classes. And if you were listening to me, you heard what they all had in common. At least the vast majority of them have in common. But if you haven't, let me tell you the common denominator right now. The common denominator that they all pretty much had in common was this. In the majority of the cases that I just told you, all these people were doing their very first indoor cycling class, the very first class. They were not used to doing this activity before. They had never done a spinning class or an indoor cycling class before in their life. They just walked in and started doing it. Well, from this common denominator, we can infer that the most likely reason why indoor cycling classes are causing rhabdomyolysis it is because people were not used to doing it or took part in a class that was more intense than they were used to. I'll say that again. The most likely reason why people were getting Rhabdo from indoor cycling classes is because they were not used to doing that activity. They weren't used to cycling, okay, the process of cycling on a bike, or they may have taken a class that was more intense than they were used to doing before. And this is in line. This is similar to what a lot of other people report when they get Rhabdo from working out. Whether they're lifting weights, whether they're doing a boot camp class, whether they're doing a cycling class, they all have this, at least the majority of them, have this common denominator in common. They were all doing a lot of stuff that they were not used to doing. That's how I like to boil down Rhabdo when I explain it to people. Rhabdo usually occurs when you do a lot of stuff that you're not used to doing. If the activity is new, you haven't done it before, or it's unusual, hadn't done it in a long time, and it's more intense than you had done before, well, then the risk of rhabdomyolysis increases. That is something that I see a lot in people who get this disorder from exercise. And it's something to keep in the back of your mind when you are maybe taking an indoor cycling class or you are going to be working out on your own. That's something that I have seen a lot over the years. Again, I've had a lot of emails from people. I've consulted with lots and lots of Rhabdo cases. I've even consulted in court cases against gyms and personal trainers that have triggered Rhabdo in individuals. And that appears to be one of the underlying mechanisms. When you do a lot of stuff you're not used to, it causes a chain reaction to occur. And in some of these individuals, Rhabdo is the outcome. So, how do you not get this disorder if you're going to be taking an indoor spinning class, cycling class? How do you do this? I've got a few tips that I want to bring to your attention that I think are going to help you, because spinning is very popular. You know, there's boutiques popping up all over the place where that's all they do. And you see these advertisements on TV for these bikes where they'll ship them to your home. And, you know, it's very, very popular. Every gym I've ever been to has had bikes. So what do you do if you're trying to reduce your risk? Number one, the first thing that I would say is, if you're going to be taking one of these classes, tell the instructor that you have never taken an indoor cycling class before. Walk up to the instructor and tell him this. If you do this, they're going to pay more attention to you. They're going to give you special attention in the class. They're going to show you how to set up the bike. They're going to keep an eye on you in class. They may give you some insights into how to do the class. So don't be afraid to walk up to that instructor and say, hey, spinning instructor, this is my very first spinning class. I've never done this before. What do you recommend? How do I get on this bike properly? How do I do this safely? And they're going to tell you, they're going to give you their full attention, right then and there. And also during the class as well, they're going to pay extra special attention to you. So that's the first thing I would say. Related to that, the next thing I would say is, if you're in the class itself, please, 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 please do not try to keep up with what the instructor is doing, okay? Because she or he is really fit. They're doing sometimes 5 and 6 classes a day, sometimes for years. Their cardiovascular system is very, very strong, stronger than the average person. So don't try to keep up with the instructor, and don't try to keep up with the class either. When you're in the class, just work at your own pace. Cycle it at your own pace. If you're tired, you're tired. Don't worry about it. You will adapt eventually to the rigors of exercise training. It'll take some time, but you will adapt. You will improve. I know this will happen. And if you have to leave the class, it's okay to get off the bike and walk away. Leave the class. Do not feel embarrassed to do this. Do not feel embarrassed to get off the bike and just walk out. I think that's one of the things that plays a role in Rhabdo is people are embarrassed. They don't want to look weak in front of other individuals. And so they stay on the bike and they keep pedaling, and they basically go beyond their mental breaking point. And they push beyond their ability to normally do this activity. And that is something else that can cause this. Again, when you push beyond your mental breaking point, you're doing an activity that's much more intense than you're used to. That can trigger Rhabdo in some individuals. So if you can't do it, please get off the bike and walk the heck out of the class. It's okay. It's definitely okay. And this is a message I think people need to hear. And not just in say, spinning class, but all group exercise classes, all of them, whether it's a boot camp class, whatever class you're doing, if it's in a group, I think there is a group dynamic that you don't see anywhere else, where people sometimes feed off the energy of other people, and they say, well, they can do it, I can do it, and we're a team, and we don't let the team down. I think that is another aspect of this disorder that a lot of people are not picking up on. That group mentality, when you are in a class, can make people push beyond that mental breaking point. And again, I think that's one of the things that can contribute to this disorder. So again, you're in this class. Don't worry about letting anybody down. You're not letting anybody down. Believe me. You have to take control of your own health and wellness. And so when you think you've had enough, get off the bike, walk out of the class or any other class you're in. Don't be afraid to do this. Trust me, it's going to be okay. And the instructor of that class will be very appreciative that you did this. Believe me, no spinning class instructor wants to be in a situation where they got to pick you up off the floor. Again, if you just pass out, for instance, or you start throwing up from the bike, yeah, that can happen too. Nobody wants to be dealing with that. So you're doing them a favor by getting off the bike and leaving the class. Believe me, I'm sure every spinning instructor listening to me right now is nodding their head. Yes, we agree with what Joe is saying. It's okay to leave the class. Trust me. Another thing that I would say to you is, if you are going to take a spinning class, try to take a beginning class first. Try to take a starter or beginner class first. In some gyms, these indoor cycling classes are at different levels. They'll have beginner classes, maybe an intermediate class, and an advanced class. Ask the instructor, is this a beginner, intermediate, or advanced class? And you want to be in the right class for your fitness level. If you have never done this before, take a beginner class. Now, If that's not possible, if there is no beginner class, all right, many gyms have stationary bikes. Get on one of these stationary bikes, ride that bike at your own pace for a short period of time for the first week or two, or maybe even 3. Get used to the motion of pedaling again. Get used to that motion. Start with a low intensity, okay? Don't try to, beat the daylights out of your body in the beginning, because that's not going to serve your body at all. Low pace, just pedal at your own pace, comfortable pace. You want to get the muscles as well as the nervous system used to this activity that you had not done before. So do that for a couple weeks at a low pace. Then maybe you take that spinning class. That, in theory, may reduce your risk of getting this disorder, because you're basically preparing your body for what's going to happen in the class. And a lot of people, again, as I've tried to show you here in this week's episode, a lot of people basically just jump in, and they've never done it before. And all of a sudden it's an intense class. It's 45 minutes. It's an hour long, and that they get this. So if you prepare your body first, in theory, that makes sense that it might reduce the risk. And if I can do a sidebar for a moment and speak directly to the group fitness instructors, whether it's spinning class or whatever class instructors, if you teach a group exercise class, I personally believe all of these group exercise instructors, all of you should pre-screen those who attend your classes. I personally am a big fan of what's called the PAR-Q, P-A-R-Q. If you've never heard of this before, you can go in your search engine of choice and just type in 4 letters, P-A-R-Q document, PAR-Q document. That's the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. The Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. It's a 1-page document, has a short series of questions. If you answer yes to any of these questions, it usually means you should go to the doctor before you begin an exercise program. I think that would help group exercise instructors a lot to identify people who may need to get medical attention before they begin an exercise program. While the PAR-Q does not specifically screen for Rhabdo, it could highlight other things that, could be cause for concern and say, I think you should get checked out by your doctor first. I think group exercise instructors, they kind of get the short end of the stick in the world of the fitness world. I just do. I think they get the short end of the stick because they usually don't know who's in their class. Unless you walked up to them and told you who they were and told you their medical problems, they might not know these things. And so, I'm sure every group exercise instructor could confirm this, but, they could have someone in a class who's very fit right next to someone who may have had a heart attack. So you just don't know. And that's why I'm a big fan of the PAR-Q. Unfortunately, again, another sidebar here, a lot of gyms don't use the PAR-Q, and it frustrates the daylights out of me. And so if you are a group fitness instructor and you go to the owner or the manager of that gym you're working at and you say, hey, I heard about this great thing called the Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. Here it is. You can Google it. It'll pop right up. You can print it up and show it to them. But, see what they got to say about that. A lot of gyms don't use the PAR-Q, which frustrates me. Probably do another episode about why that is. I have some suspicions why that is, but at the very least ask. I think it'll save you a lot of headache, but it'll also let you, screen out people who, may not be appropriate for your class just right now. So I like the PAR-Q. Again, if you are a group fitness instructor and you try this, email me at my websites, joe-cannon.com or even supplementclarity.com, and let me know what happened if you went to the fitness instructor or the owner of your gym and you presented them with the PAR-Q. I'm curious what they have to say. But again, PAR-Q is free. You can go print it up right now or whenever you stop listening to this podcast. And then if you're doing one of these classes, you may know that a lot of them rely on heart rate. People have heart rate monitors and they want to stay at 80% or 75% or whatever of their maximum heart rate. And we have these watches now that you can wear that, automatically do our heart rate during exercise. That's great. Personally, I'm not a fan of heart rate. I've said this a lot of times in the past. I don't particularly like to use heart rate with individuals. I prefer another alternative method, which I think is better, and that's called the RPE scale. The RPE. RPE stands for ratings of perceived exertion. Ratings of perceived exertion, RPE scale. If you've never heard that before, you may have heard it used by its alternative name, Borg scale. Borg scale. Not the evil monsters from Star Trek. Borg was invented by a doctor named Borg many years ago, and it's simply a 0 to 10 scale. Again, this is something you can freely pull up on the internet just, today if you want to. Just, go on your search engine of choice and just type in RPE scale or Borg scale, go to the images and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a 0 to 10 scale where a 0 is nothing. It's the easiest thing in the world, kind of like sitting there doing nothing. And a 10 is the hardest activity effort you've ever done before. And any couple of seconds from now, you will be forced to stop from sheer failure. That's a 10. So if you're in one of these, maybe indoor cycling classes or whatever, get familiar with the RPE scale, what the numbers mean, and generally maybe you stay within a rating of 2 to 6. 2 to 6, I think, would be appropriate for the vast majority of people, especially those who are just starting an exercise class of any kind. I think 2 to 6 is going to be fine. So again, check it out, the RPE scale or Borg scale. Go online. It's free. You don't need no watch or no heart rate monitor. You don't have to purchase anything. And that's why I like the RPE better. And again, it's based on you and how you feel. It's not based on something like, 70% of maximum heart rate, which could be perceived as differently for different people. Someone, for instance, who is very fit might perceive a heart rate of 80% of their max as being really, really easy, while maybe an unfit person or a regularly fit person may perceive 80% as being incredibly difficult. Where the RPE scale is more personalized. I like that. It's more personalized to the individual. Heart rate is general. It's general. RPE is personal. And so I prefer that because we're not dealing with average people. We're dealing with individuals, and we all respond differently to different intensities of exercise. It just depends on our fitness level. So I mentioned earlier that you want to definitely bring, you don't want to be dehydrated. So definitely bring some water to the class. It's going to help you. If you run out of water during the class, okay, get off the bike or whatever, leave the class, go get some more water. I have been to gyms where I have seen people literally walk out of the classroom and go to the water fountain and refill up their water bottle. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to walk out of the class again. Again, embarrassment, don't worry about that. We're talking about your health here. Being dehydrated, it could make rhabdo worse. There is evidence that being dehydrated could increase the severity of rhabdo, but I do like to point out that water doesn't stop rhabdo from occurring. Drinking water doesn't stop the occurrence of rhabdo, but it could mitigate some of the problems if someone did get this. What I'm talking about today actually was sparked by a conversation I had recently with a friend and colleague. Her name is April James, and April she's a fitness instructor. She teaches personal trainers, and she also does spinning certifications. And April had called me up and said, "Hey, Joe, I'm updating my seminar, and I wanted to include Rhabdo for my class because a lot of spinning instructors are not aware of it." April had told me a story about some instructor she had run into years ago, that the person actually in the class turned off the fans and actually restricted water from the people to try to make the workout even harder. Don't do that, spinning instructors. Hopefully nobody these days are doing anything like that. So, definitely stay hydrated when you are exercising, whether it's any kind of class you're taking, whether even if you're on your own, working out a personal trainer, definitely bring some fluid with you or buy it there at the gym, or, even use the water fountains after the pandemic is over and they let you use the water fountains again. See my previous episode on staying safe in the gym after the pandemic. I did that, about 4 or 5 episodes back, so check that out. I did talk about the water fountain issue. When you are taking a class, one thing I did want to point out that, again, it's kind of off topic a little bit, but I know these things are popular. I don't think you should be taking fat burners or weight loss supplements, most weight loss supplements, or pre-workout drinks, especially if you're doing any of these classes, but even in general, I don't like any of these things, to be honest with you. Most of these fat burners and weight loss supplements, pre-workout drinks, don't believe the hype. The vast majority of these products are just bunches of stimulants, specifically caffeine. They're basically expensive caffeine supplements. Whether you believe it or not, I'm telling you the truth, they are expensive caffeine supplements. They'll sprinkle in some herbs here and there, which may have a little bit of evidence or something like that. But the vast majority of these things contain lots and lots of caffeine. And if you doubt that, just look at the supplement facts label on the back of these products. You'll see how much caffeine they usually contain. Sometimes it's 200-300 milligrams of caffeine. Again, caffeine, it may help exercise performance, but if you're not used to caffeine, there could be a mild diuretic effect, which is definitely not what you want to happen during exercise. But beyond that, it can affect your heart function and stuff like that, which in some individuals, not a good thing. But getting to the crux of the problem, you see a lot of these days, these influencers on, Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, and they'll talk about these products that they're taking, realize that they're being paid to talk about a lot of these products. And again, who are these influencers? What are their qualifications? I'm telling you that I have investigated dietary supplements for about 25 years. I know a lot about this stuff, and if you go to my Supplement Clarity website, you will see my reviews on a lot of these products. Some of them you've seen on television, some of them you've probably heard about on social media, and I break them down by their ingredients and tell you what's in them, and I show you the research on these products. I'm telling you, a lot of these products have zero clinical studies on the products themselves. And when I look at their ingredients, I see lots of caffeine. There go. The common denominator to these things is caffeine. I'm not a big fan of them, especially during any kind of exercise routine. I have heard of some really bad things happening from people who have taken some of these products. It's just sad, the stories that I've heard, which I may do an entire episode on just some of these reports. Again, you don't need them. They're not going to help you. They're not going to help you lose weight any faster or anything like that. The best way, if weight loss is the goal, eat a few less calories a day. Not a lot, just a few less. Don't have to go on any crazy diets. Just a few less calories per day. You combine that with a little bit of exercise, and you give it time. That is the most logical way to lose weight. So save money on those fat burners. Okay, so those are some of my tips on how to basically cut back your risk of getting rhabdo. You may have been scared about what some of the things I said, because rhabdo is serious, and I want you to realize that the odds of rhabdo for most people probably low. Even though I do talk about this a lot, I do like you to know the risk of rhabdomyolysis is pretty low for most people. And again, it's hard to figure out what the actual incidence is in the general population. As I often say, nobody's really tracking it in the general population. I will point out to you that there's researchers that in one of the papers I told you about, there was a paper came out in 2015. These were researchers in South Korea, and they looked at 70 people who had gotten rhabdo. Of those 70 people, 13 cases of those 70 were directly linked to spinning class. Okay, so 13 out of 70. If you do that math, well, that's almost 20%. Almost 20% of the people getting rhabdo, got it from spinning class. So does that mean that you have a 20% chance of getting rhabdo from spinning indoor cycling classes? Well, no, not necessarily. That's not true. You can't make that quantum leap and say that. Again, there's not a lot of cases out there to draw from. And again, this was from South Korea, and South Korean instructors may not translate over to, say, in America or Germany, etc. So it's hard to say. My guess again is that overall the risk for most people is probably pretty low. That said, this report I'm talking about here, this report did mention something that I kind of confirms what I have been talking about for a while, and that is they appear to show that, well, there may be an increase in spinning-induced rhabdo over the last several years. There seems to be an increase in people winding up in the hospital from rhabdo from indoor cycling classes. And again, I've been saying for a while, I do think that rhabdo is on the increase, and there's probably a whole lot of factors involved with that. I wonder about now, after the pandemic, gyms are starting to open up again. And you have people who are going back to the gym, haven't been there for several months, and next thing they want to do is do the exact same workout they did 3 and 4 months ago. Well, wait a minute. You've been sitting around watching Netflix for 3 months. What makes you think you can go back into the gym and return to your normal routine in the gym? I think that's unwise. I would not return and do the same thing you did 3 or 4 months ago if you hadn't been working out on your own along the last 3 or 4 months. So I do think that's going to cause an increase in the risk of rhabdo. I am seeing reports of this. I'm seeing people talking about this on the internet. I have gotten some emails recently on this. So again, if you are in a state or an area where they're starting to open up the gym, I do have a previous episode. Go back in the archives and look for it where I talk about how to begin your exercise program again. I think I give you some good tips there, so do check that out. But these researchers in South Korea do appear to be showing, from at least their data, that there's an increase, an uptick in spinning from rhabdo, or rhabdo from spinning. So keep that in the back of your mind. Again, we also ultimately don't know the risk or the rate of rhabdo. I do think most people it is low, and so I definitely don't want to scare you, but I want you to be armed with the knowledge. And that's what it's really all about. As I've been saying for years, the best way to reduce the risk of rhabdo is to stay educated. Education is the best prevention against this disorder. At the end of the day, the more you know, the less likely this is to happen. And so if anything, I've gotten you to better understand this condition, well, then I've achieved my goal this week, and I'm happy. And so with that, I'm going to end this episode, except for one last thing that I like to do at the end of each episode, and let's give you the quote of the week. And this one comes from Dolly Parton, who said, "If you want the rainbow, you got to put up with the rain." Pretty good. I got to give it to her. So it's true. If you want the rainbow, you got to put up with the rain. Well, hopefully it's not going to rain today where you're at. And so with that, I'm going to end this week's episode, except for saying I will see you next time, same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, go out, be safe, and where you can, try to make a difference.